How do you drive innovation and challenge the status quo? Welcome to the Immerse Catalyst series in partnership with Lloyds Bank. I'm your host, Izzy Obeng, CEO of Foundervine. And in this 4-part series, we will be bringing you incredible founders who are defying the odds and shaping their industries in different ways. We'll be talking about the highs, the lows, the challenges, and that thing that keeps them driving forward. This week in the series, we are talking to Tendai Moyo. Tendai is the CEO of Ruka Hair. Is creating the go-to brand for Black women when it comes to their hair. Tendai is a Black woman to have a permanent hair stand in Selfridges and has raised over $4 million in funding. I'm really excited to be joined by Tendai Moyo. You are the Chief Executive Officer of Ruka Hair.
Yes.
And you have had quite an interesting career so far. You're still very young, but you have moved between corporate spaces, starting your own business, working in consulting, and now you are the founder and CEO of Ruka.
Yes.
Tell us about your journey. How did you get here?
Okay. So it's been quite a journey. I am Zimbabwean. I was born in Zimbabwe and I moved to the UK quite young with my parents. My mum was a nurse. My dad was a pharmacist at the time. And there was a lot of healthcare movement between Zimbabwe and the UK. And I think for me, my first hair experience when I moved here, I lived in Swindon. And if anyone's heard of Swindon, the most interesting thing there is there's a magic roundabout.
The roundabouts are crazy.
They are
Swindon.
crazy. There is one that has like 6 within one. But beyond that, there really wasn't much else happening. And there wasn't a large Black population there. And so as a young girl, my mom took me to the salon and the stylist there told me that they didn't do my hair. And I remember not really being upset, but just more confused. I mean, I was like 9 at the time, and I just didn't really understand what was going on. But that marked my first experience. And then, like many other African parents, my parents were big on education. I took my studies quite seriously. But then at 17, I kind of got into the hair space again. And I think for me, that marked the beginning of my journey into how I saw the hair world, and I guess marked what I wanted to change going forward now at 28.
Brilliant. And so you have been, like I said, navigating quite corporate spaces and also the hair and beauty world, which is a whole world of its own. And what was it like trying to figure out where you sat in your career and going down either the corporate route into consulting or investment banking? You did a few internships in investment banking.
Yeah.
Or going down the hair and beauty space. So actually, did you see it as either or
Yeah.
you could do it at the same time?
Yeah, what's really interesting is when I tried to start the business at 17, it was very much I had a cousin in China at the time. He was studying medicine there. And he was like, look, I'm in the district where most of the hair manufacturers are. And if you want, I can send you some hair. And so for me, it was very much the fact that I couldn't access that hair easily. From Swindon, I would go to Bristol or Reading or London to find those hair products. And for me, it was just about bringing a product to my friends, my family, myself, that we couldn't readily get. And so I didn't really see myself as entering the hair space at that point. And I mean, that quickly went in the bin because I found 2 YouTubers, great YouTubers and influencers now, Brini Lee, Chanel Boateng, and they graciously received the hair and told me it was awful.
Okay.
And
knowing what they're like on screen, I can imagine they gave it to you that straight.
They were straight, but they were lovely.
Yeah.
They were really like, we want to support your business, but this ain't it. And so I think for me,
you need that sometimes. That early feedback is so important, isn't it?
It was, and they were very detailed. They said the texture didn't match. They said, it was shedding. They literally broke it out. And I took it back to the manufacturer and they said we can't help you. And that's when I realized supply chain was a problem. But to answer your question, I think for me at that point, I realized that I was interested in entrepreneurship. But I also took the professional route quite seriously. I knew it meant a lot to my family. I think it meant something to me as well, that stability. And so I went to the London School of Economics. I studied business maths and stats. And initially I was like, investment banking makes sense. But then I went down the strategy consulting route. And that was because it combined the finance side with like learning how big companies stay successful. But alongside that, I was also running two businesses. So for me, it's always been the best of both worlds and not really having to choose one or compromise myself in the process.
Have you always had that entrepreneurial mindset?
I think so. I think like I used to watch The Apprentice and I was like convinced I was going to go on there at some point. And I definitely feel like for me where that comes from is my parents come from two large families. My grandfather on my dad's side had four wives and they all had like eight kids. So I have a lot of aunts and uncles on that side of the family. And my mom's side equally is actually not as big, but still quite big. And my parents look after a lot of people and support a lot of people back home. And so I always knew for me, I wanted to make enough money to be able to support those people, but also live a decent life myself.
Yeah.
Which meant that I didn't think the average salary was going to be enough. Sending kids to school, supporting other people, because Zimbabwe is a beautiful country, but the economy is very tough. And so I think entrepreneurship for me was always a way of both solving big problems, but also actually it really is a lot for me about how do I get to the point where I can financially support people in a way where I still have some flexibility. I can control what I do, and being the founder of a company was made the most sense for me.
The interesting space I find as an entrepreneur is where profit meets impact. So you're moving into a space that you are kind of one of many few,
Yeah.
and you're also fighting a fight for good ethical practices.
Yeah.
Why is that so important to you?
I think it's important to me because I am that consumer. And what that means is I've grown up seeing these experiences. And we had a Ruka Takes Africa dinner a month or so ago.
Can I come to the next one?
Come to the next one. Come to the next dinner. They're always good fun. But at the dinner, we spoke about one of the experiences that I had growing up was I would chemically relax my hair. But I remember my aunties, my mom would be like, "You've got to keep it in until it burns." And for me, that's crazy now looking back, but we didn't have education at that point to know what the right practices were, what these products are actually doing to our hair. And I think for me, that was characteristic and still is characteristic of the fundamental issues, which are exactly as you've pointed out, that the people who are creating the products for us don't understand what that experience is, number one. And then number two, I think a really big issue is it's not regulated. And so you have hair extensions where they've been sourced from women who aren't being paid fairly. Some of them aren't even women. These are young girls who are selling, or their hair is being taken unethically. And there are a bunch of unethical practices that really a lot of us don't even see at the end buying these products, and therefore aren't even aware of the lack of ethics, the lack of sustainability, and the lack of safety within this market.
I hear you. And one of the things that I find really interesting are the overlooked markets that exist and that we don't often talk about. Black women hair care is one of the biggest markets. We spend a lot of money on our hair.
A lot.
But there is not as much innovation, I would say. There aren't enough people maybe trying to bring new things in to make things more efficient, less expensive.
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of investors who unfortunately are still predominantly male,
Yeah.
I think kind of 85 to 90% of decision makers within venture firms are male.
Yeah.
And they are overwhelmingly white as well.
Yeah.
It affects the funding
Yes.
that goes into these industries. And so tell us how big the hair care market is that you're working in and the journey that you've been on in terms of raising the funding that you're looking for.
Absolutely. So This market is significant, as you've pointed out. So Black women spend 6 times on hair care compared to our white counterparts and 13 times on hair extensions. It's a $13 billion industry. About $6 billion comes from expenditure within Africa. But the challenge that you have is that 40% of the hair that's sold into Africa is counterfeit.
Wow. 40%?
40%, yes. That was in an article released by the Hustle Co. A great article on hair, and I recommend anyone read it. But I think that is characteristic of what is the biggest challenge with innovation within this industry. One of our investors, and I'll go into our journey in a second, but one of our investors said that this market is like the Viagra market 20 years ago. And I was like, huh? I don't
You were like,
understand.
excuse me?
I don't understand the connection. But actually, with the Viagra market, Viagra was a very taboo topic. I mean, even sexual health, people weren't that comfortable talking about it 20 to 30 years ago. And so it meant that purchasing it was a very back alley experience, and it wasn't front and center. And so it couldn't be improved upon. And when you think about hair extensions, I remember in primary or secondary school, if I got my hair done, people would be like, is that horsehair? And it was almost something where you wouldn't feel that comfortable talking about hair extensions, even though they're an integral part of protective styling. They have been part of our culture back to when the Egyptians were wearing the wigs, and so it is very much something that has been part of our society. And I think there's been a change in people feeling more comfortable talking about their hair. The natural hair movement, I think, allowed a lot of Black women to be bold and own their experience. But you also even have celebrities like Kylie Jenner, who them wearing wigs, whether you like it or not, has improved that experience. And so I think fundraising for us was about how do we take bold white men and explain to them why wigs are an incredibly exciting market that they should invest in. But not only that, there is innovation, exciting innovation that can happen and empower people globally. And I think for us, we knew we weren't going to get that first check from traditional investors, to be honest with you. And so we did a crowdfund. So that crowdfund was for £25,000. I went online, I did a video, I had no products at that point, and my motto was, it takes a village. And I said, if you want to change the hair industry, if you want to be part of that revolution, join me. And I had over 200 Black women messaging me across LinkedIn, across Instagram, with horror stories, paying $500 for a wig that never arrived, losing their hair based on a gel that they bought in a random store. And I think for me, it really reinforced that this was a product and a brand that was necessary. But I think having that backing of so many people, when I then went to investors to fundraise £100,000, they couldn't deny the traction. Even if you don't understand wigs, you don't understand frontals, what you can understand is numbers. What you can understand is economic power, and what you can understand is a solution to a problem. And that's how we went about fundraising.
That is a fantastic story. And I think that as a business that often supports pre-traction, MVP stage, by MVP, I mean minimum viable products, businesses, we often find founders who are at that kind of chicken and egg stage where you haven't necessarily got the customers in order to prove the traction, but you need that funding in order to get the customers to prove the traction. And your journey shows that there are ways that you can be quite innovative in terms of how you show traction, and also build a community around your business before it really exists. Talk to us about the conversations you had and the reactions you got when you had these conversations as well.
So I think the other thing is, this wasn't, by the time I founded Ruka at this point, it wasn't my first time fundraising or attempting to. As I said, I'd worked on 2 businesses during uni, one of which was a office wear business for women, and I'd found it extremely difficult to fundraise. This time round, we're now talking 2020, October, I was very selective about the people that I reached out to. I went on LinkedIn, I searched angel investor, but I searched for people who'd either invested in underserved communities and consumers, or had backed founders that I really liked, or had existed in the beauty space. And so I think that helped to filter out people who honestly wouldn't care. And I spoke to, my first two conversations were with Matt Robinson, who didn't invest at that time, but he did later on. He was one of the co-founders of Monzo, and he introduced me to Ian Hogarth, who is one of my favorite investors. He invested at that point. And I think the conversations were interesting. To your point, Ian was the one who kind of said it's kind of like the Viagra market, but it helped him understand the challenges that we were facing, right? And he was immediately able to connect the dots. And so I think those conversations were about how we get people aligned without necessarily understanding the product. Now, those two conversations went great. 50 after that didn't go so well. I heard a lot of no's. I heard, what was challenging actually was also people who were in the community who also couldn't see why this would scale. And I think sometimes when you've seen a problem for so long and not seen good solutions for so long, it can make it difficult to imagine a world where there is a company that is a brand and that sells hair extensions. For so long, you would buy from a vendor. You'd go on AliExpress and you'd take your drawer of the hat. And if your hair arrives and it's great, good. If not, you've lost $200. And that was how it worked. And so a lot of people really struggled to see a world where it was better. And so actually our earliest investors were tech investors. I think they were a little bit more used to imagining the impossible. But it was tough and it was a challenge. And I think that 100K was the most difficult. We've since now raised 4.1 million in total across 3 rounds. And I think each time progressively we had more proof points and we were more confident ourselves as a team. I was boldly able to say we've been able to get these customers. We've been able to get into Selfridges. Serena Williams has worn our hair. Thames has worn our hair. And these are people who have, the access to the best that money can buy, and they're wearing our product. And so I think in the beginning really is about backing yourself, but also getting that traction, as you've said. But I think that confidence grows over time for sure, and you get better at telling your story.
That's really powerful. And, congratulations on the raise. And I say that as someone who understands intimately the struggle in terms of closing a round. What is it like for you being in a space where there isn't an incredible amount of representation and you are often not competing, but you are often trying to, present what you're doing in a space that hasn't traditionally been as supportive or open to founders like you pitching?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge really is that because there are so few Black women founders, I feel like it makes your market look smaller and you get lumped together. And I remember one of the one of the biggest things, and we're so fortunate that Sharmadine is one of our investors. But very early on, whenever we would talk about our business, people would instantly mention Beauty Stack. And I guess for me, when you look at the hair and beauty industry, it's massive. And what Sharmadine and Beauty Stack managed to achieve, incredible, but within the beauty space. And when we first started, we were talking about hair extensions. And I guess maybe part of it is a challenge of people struggling to find comparables within extensions, even though I could give you 10, right now. But I think it does become difficult because there's almost this vacuum that people create where that is their reference, not because you're in the same business, but because it's another Black woman. And that was something that I really did find challenging because, it then meant I was almost explaining our business against another business that wasn't a competitor. It wasn't even in the same space. And I would say that was a significant challenge. But the fortunate thing was I had relationships with Sharmadine. I had a relationship with Nicole Krenzel. I had relationships with these people that I was able to get that mentorship and that support and actually be able to explain to people that that is not actually a relevant comparison to this business. And so I would say that was one of the challenges. I think the other is the pressure. I think what I've realized is a lot of white men can fail in the VC space. The business can end and they start another one tomorrow. I think because we've tackled a lot of firsts, the prospect of failure for me, I've had to work through that not being such a big thing. And it's tough because I want this business to exist. I want to solve this problem, but I also want to exist in a world where I have the same opportunity and flexibility to fail the same way that other founders do. And 99% of startups do fail.
Let's just kind of go back to why some of these assumptions about Black businesses exist.
Yeah.
So we're in an ecosystem where, yes, generally speaking, a lot of businesses aren't successful.
Yeah.
And in our community, there are several Black women-led businesses who are doing things in hair and beauty, whether that is a solo operation or they have some kind of small operation. But scale is a massive challenge. And you are tackling that challenge. How do you scale your impact?
Yes.
So tell us about your business model. How have you structured it so that you are able to deliver at the volume and at the consistency that you have done so far? And what is it that's setting you apart from some of those competitors?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I'd probably like to start off with the way that I think about this business. And I mean, even though I don't think that much about Elon Musk or think about him in general, what I really loved was the letters that he wrote about Tesla. And those letters were about a grand and big vision for this business and tackling, the electrical vehicles market, but also tackling sustainability. And I think similarly for me, when I look at the hair industry, a lot of people struggle to see how it can get to the place where it is grand and it is big in the same way. But for me, I see hair as integral to daily life. It's emotional. It is part of culture in a way that I think when you look at other pieces of hair and beauty in Africa, people doing your hair was a show of affection. When we think about our memories when we're young, it's, your mom doing your hair and that's how you form that bond with her. And so for me, I would really not only like to build this business to that level of scale, but actually I want to be able to show that there is genuine innovation, there is technological advancement that will improve people's lives if we actually tackle this hair piece. And so that's what I would like to achieve. And then in terms of our overall business model, look, we've started off with direct to consumer. We are making hair extensions and hair products, but really what we're tackling is hair loss. And a lot of people don't think about hair extensions in that way, but globally, 1 in 3 African women are experiencing a hair loss issue today.
It's a huge problem.
It's a huge problem. Whether you're looking at traction alopecia because extensions weren't installed properly, whether you're looking at cancer as a disease that leads to hair loss, or whether you're just looking at aging. Hair loss is one of those things that doesn't just impact Black women, it affects everyone at some point in their lives. And people aren't talking about it. But for me, we've started by creating ethical, safe hair solutions. The next step is how do we make those medical grade? How do we offer NHS wide diversity of hair options such that all their patients are covered? And by doing so, we not only create a brand that people can love, be excited by, have fun with, but actually at all stages of your life, you know that you have a brand that is safe and that speaks to you and that you don't have to feel ashamed about any of these issues. And that for me is like the big vision of this brand.
I want all of that for you. To be prioritizing ethics and be prioritizing the needs of women, it feels to me just very different from a lot of what I see in the market. So I see that passion, I see that dedication, and I want to know what is the personal highlight for you of your journey so far?
Oh, that's a good question. And in answering that, I think what I have to confess is that the first year and a half, 2 years of this has been a blur. I think I was on survival mode for a lot of it, actually. And I remember it's so funny because Ian introduced me to one of the co-founders of Spotify. And he said, look, this journey, if you don't actually soak it in and be present, you're not going to enjoy any of it. And that's I remember when he said that, I'm like, how can I not enjoy it? Like, you're building, it's fun. And it is, but it's fun in a way where if you're not careful, you can say, all right, we want to get Selfridges as a contract, right? As a retailer. You get Selfridges as a retailer. Then as soon as that's done, I remember the day that we opened Selfridges, we were already thinking about next month's sales goal. And then you hit next month's sales goal and then you think, oh, okay, we've got to hire this person to fill this gap. And so it becomes this constant cycle of what is the next metric that we need to prove. And that is very symptomatic of being a venture capital backed startup is you don't go slow. You have to be aggressive. The reason you get this funding is so that you can grow much faster than a traditional business, right? And so in answering the highlight part, I think I would probably say the moment where I realized that I have to enjoy this journey, I think it was probably the middle of last year. And I just came to a point where I was like, if I don't slow down and learn to smell the roses, I'm just going to look back at this and not feel much. Even though we've achieved a lot of things, I'm not going to feel like the happiness of those moments. And so I think the moment I did that, I started therapy last year. I started spending more time again with, my family, my friends. I went out that summer.
You went out?
I went out.
You went out.
I lived.
Out.
I went to the Amapiano events. I think took back my peace and my happiness whilst also still maintaining my ambition and my vision for this business.
We kind of glossed over the Selfridges thing. And I'd love for us to spend a moment there because you have a permanent stand in Selfridges and you are the first Black woman to have a permanent stand in Selfridges. I'm just going to say that one more time for the people at the back. You are the first Black woman to have a permanent stand at Selfridges.
Yeah.
What was that journey like?
So that journey was fun. And I think the thing about me is not very much feels out of reach, to be honest. I think we spoke to retailers the year before and all of them were like hair, human hair. Ooh, it was a bit of nervousness. And so I parked that. And then interestingly, last year, most of the retailers came back and gave us retail offers. And that was interesting again, because I think there was a movement. There was that proof point that we were a legitimate brand. And I also think our community spoke for us a lot of the time. We had co-creators. So our co-creators are people who are deep in the Ruka village. They help us with our products, but some of them were Selfridges staff.
One of the biggest challenges in starting a business is finding a good co-founder.
Yeah.
It's finding good leaders within your team who you can trust.
Yeah.
To understand the chaos, to get on with it and just do what needs to be done with minimal guidance. I often hear a lot of horror stories about working with family members, working with close friends. It can be quite challenging.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's a must, especially near the beginning of your journey.
Absolutely.
So what's been the experience building a team and particularly kind of working with your sister as well?
Yeah. So, I work with my co-founder is one of my close friends, Ugo. I have other friends within the businesses and of course my sister. And I think how that happened is I'm surrounded by very smart people. My co-founder, Ugo, was a strategy consultant at McKinsey. She supported the Charlotte Tilbury transition to Africa. She's done incredible things. My design director, Jorge, I met him when I was working on the office wear business. Again, he's made this brand feel like something really unique within the hair space. How he thinks about the visual aspect of things was one of the reasons Selfridges were excited by us. Our stand is super fun. It's very Apple-esque, but it's also, beauty-led. And so I think for me, it was more so that the people were talented and happened to be my friends. And I think there are great things about that. early on, you understand each other. There are a lot of things that you can do without necessarily having to say. And so I think those things definitely propelled the business forward. I think there are challenges with that as well, because you have this balance of you care about each other, but business is also business. And I think the way we've tackled that is radical honesty. I think it's about having a conversation. How do I feel as your friend? How do I feel as your partner? How do I feel as your manager? And constantly taking into account both those perspectives is difficult.
It is.
It's
And,
hard.
that whole radical honesty piece, radical candor, I often think about how important it is in the business
Mhm.
and how, from a founder vine perspective, I don't think we would be able to do what we do if my leadership team didn't feel like they could respectfully disagree with me, to
Absolutely.
challenge my thinking. If
Yeah.
we couldn't have honest conversations with each other, when they get a little bit tense, a little bit
Mhm,
spicy, we
mhm.
can take some time back and come back later.
Yeah.
That emotional intelligence as a leader is so important.
Mhm,
And I'd love to know how you would describe your leadership style.
mhm. I think my EQ is higher than my IQ. Um,
It's always a good thing as a leader because you hire other smart people who can do that bit
exactly.
and you can manage them well with your bit.
Exactly, exactly. Right now we have biodegradable synthetic hair. I don't know how. Sam came from Dyson. He's our innovation lead. He developed that. It's the first of its kind. If you ask me to explain how that biodegradable piece came about, I'm not
You'll
your
say
person.
pass.
Yeah, hard pass, to be honest. But I definitely think my EQ is higher. And I think the thing is, I do care about people. I care about how everyone feels when they come into the business and how they leave. I think I have a fairly millennial view on dedication to the business, which is, while you're there, work hard, be committed, but I don't expect people to be there forever. And so with all my teammates, I think we have very open and honest, transparent conversations about what they actually want, and what would be a success in terms of what they take away when they leave.
Interesting. Just on that. So
Mhm.
you mentioned Elon Musk earlier.
Mhm.
And I think that if you are an entrepreneur who's kind of innovating in a sector that has traditionally been male dominated,
Mhm.
there is that kind of old cliche that women either tend to emulate men and
Yeah.
therefore maybe be a bit harsher and a
Yeah.
bit less soft because
Yeah.
that's the way they think they need to present in order to be taken seriously. Or they go down the kind of softer route, which can, I think, quite disparagingly be called kind of more maternal, kind
Yeah.
of like softer,
Yeah.
and risk not being able to have the assertiveness or the authority to lead. And so
Yeah.
you seem to have a style that blends having high EQ and empathy for people
Mm.
with also just being about getting the job done.
Yes.
And so in that, do you feel like as a woman that's leading in the space that you're leading in, that style is common
Mm.
amongst your peers? Like,
Mm.
what do you think as women we need to be doing more of in
Mm.
order to make sure we're able to build the kinds of businesses that stand the test of time?
Yeah. I think it's hard to say. I haven't seen that many women in leadership, but I had a fantastic role model and mentor at Bain. Her name was Hannah. She was my consultant, so she was kind of my senior on our first case. And what I loved about Hannah was it felt like she was being herself. She was this person who massively cared about people. She was really invested in my journey, but people respected her because she got her job done and she got it done well, and she didn't apologize for working very hard, but she also was someone who could respect her boundaries. And so I think for me, creating the culture of this business, I just wanted to be myself. I sometimes go into work with my onesie, and my hair barely done. Sometimes I come with a bust down and I'm going to go to the office today looking cute. And I just think for me, it's how can I continue being very authentic and true to who I am. But I also think I've had to learn things as well. As a very empathetic leader, it's finding what that balance is. I'm not a therapist. And I say that in the, I've always taken that role in my friendships of like being, how do I help this person get from A to B? But actually, as a CEO, what that means is I can't take the role of HR, but I can be caring and supportive. But I still have to figure out what those boundaries are for myself and my colleagues, right? And also, I work extremely hard. What does that mean for the rest of my team? Tomorrow's bank holiday. I've forgotten so many
Oh,
times.
I've never remembered a bank holiday. People remind me and I'm like, oh, we
Oh,
can cancel
oh
that
yeah,
meeting.
okay.
Sorry.
But I'm fundraising, and so we have investors in the US. I still have meetings Friday and Monday, but at the same time, I have to make sure that my team has those boundaries,
Absolutely.
And so what I do for myself doesn't necessarily apply to everyone else. But equally, when I rest, as I said, I'm a piano. Summer is coming up again.
You're ready.
I'm ready.
You stay ready.
And so when summer comes, I'm going to be outside. And so I really have, I think as a leader, learned to respect my working style, but not necessarily imprint that on everyone else.
That's really powerful. It's really powerful. And authenticity is one thing that comes up over and over again in the conversations that we have. The best leaders I'm finding have this real strong sense of self and don't waver from that sense of self, and also have a strong kind of integrity to them in everything they do and how they lead.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of women watching you, a lot of women who are looking at the journey that Ruka is on and who want to see what that looks like for them in whatever space they want to innovate in.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to people watching you and wanting to emulate your journey in some way?
Yeah. I would say there is a game. I think as much as people don't like to discuss that, I think there are ways in which things become easier. I spoke about the credibility point and choosing not to skip on the consulting route, because in all honesty, it did make fundraising easier. But those options aren't always available to everyone, right? And I think sometimes people ignore the privilege of those things, but there is privilege. Even for me as a Black woman, I have privilege having gone to Bain that has opened up certain doors. And so the first thing I would say is there are cards that are being played, and people should be transparent about that, so which card can I pick up versus which card isn't available to me. When you know your state of affairs very clearly, I think the next thing is to make sure that you exploit the things that are there for people who are marginalized. And again, I think sometimes people can be quite shy or coy about that, but the truth is there are things that are blocking blocking Black women from being able to tap into their full potential. And so I think you should never be afraid to ask for a helping hand. There can be this thing, especially in African culture, about going out there and putting yourself out there and asking for these things.
Say it again.
But you should.
Yeah.
You absolutely should. And I truly believe it does take a village. So the second thing would be go out there, get what you need, and don't be afraid to ask for help. And then the final thing is, I would say be bold and ambitious, and don't let people define what bold looks like. I get a lot of people who, when they don't understand me or don't know me that well, can think I am quite shy. I'm very observant at times. And so in certain situations, I'm not the most talkative person. I'm soaking things in. And so people are like, oh, don't be this, don't be shy. And I think it's because being bold and ambitious looks one way to people. It looks like the person with bravado, the loudest person. Whereas I think there are a lot of people who are quietly bold, quietly ambitious. And so whatever being bold and ambitious looks like to you, be that. Go to places where they celebrate that. A lot of our investors are very similar to me. They value being true to yourself and not necessarily like the whole outward nature of it. And so that's what I would say is my third tip. Be bold and ambitious, whatever that looks like to you.
Tendai, you have been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. You are a visionary. You are incredibly accomplished at such a young age. And I'm genuinely very excited to see what you do next and to support that journey in any way that I can or any way we can at Foundervine.
Thank you, Izzy, and thank you for having me. I feel like platforms like this create such an opportunity for all of us to learn. And I know this is the way that I learn about a lot of the things that I apply to the business. So it's an honor to be here.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for watching and listening to the Immerse Catalyst series in partnership with Lloyds Bank. For more like this, subscribe to our series wherever you are listening. To find out more about the program, please visit our website at www.foundervine.com.